Curtis Valentine here, founder of Real Men Teach, and you are listening to Ed Up, Accelerated Excellence.
This episode of Ed Up Accelerated Excellence is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of Ed Up Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EDUPXE15OFF. Check the show notes for more information or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Accelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. Welcome to Ed Up Accelerated Excellence, the podcast for the advancement of educational excellence and equity. And I'm your host, Jacob Easley, the second PhD PMP. And our guest today is Jacqueline Rodriguez, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the National Center for Learning Disabilities. Jackie, can I call you Jackie?
Of course you can, Jacob. It's so nice to see you again.
Excellent. So Jackie, you just tell us a bit about what is NCLD for those who may not be familiar.
The National Council for Learning Disabilities is a not-for-profit organization nearing its 50th year. Our origin story won't be a surprise to anybody in the special education community, is that two parents of children with disabilities started NCLD many years ago, the Rosells, the NFL commissioner and his wife, to address supporting kids in classrooms and ensuring that they had access to high-quality education and supports. And throughout our last 5 decades, we have expanded the work of the organization to not only advocate on behalf of, but we advocate with our constituents. So we have young adults, we have families and caregivers, we have professionals across the country, and we have a board of which is constituted of family members with students and themselves who are neurodivergent. And we provide policy and advocacy supports. We produce seminal research in the field of learning disabilities, and we do a lot of programming for all of those constituents, fellowships and grassroots convenings, so that the community is not only built within, but built together. And we elevate and destigmatize learning disabilities for all.
Listen, that sounds absolutely amazing. Very important work, 50 years and still going strong. And it sounds like much of your work is centered around advocacy, but partnership, working with constituent groups. Can you clarify for us, when you say young adults, does NCLD work with high school students or the full P-12 spectrum, or
we do it all.
College students?
We do it all. We recently went through a strategic planning process. For those of you in this field, organization, or university space, many people roll their eyes, oh, strategic planning. But we really took it upon ourselves to dig deep with our stakeholders, and we asked people who have been a part of the NCLD fabric for, in this case, decades. What do they need from us? How can we support them? How can the relationship between this organization and the people we serve be reciprocal? And so what we learned is that NCLD actually provides not just the policy and advocacy, but the service and programming from kindergarten all the way into career pathways. And our new mission, which we unveiled last year, and our new vision both encompass supporting within the community, but advocating with community externally as well.
So from kindergarten to career. So that's the full spectrum of supports for students with learning disabilities.
That's correct.
Thank you for that. So you and I both have origins in P-12 education going back a few years. And we both know each other through the Holmes Scholars Program. So I want to just link all of this together. So you've been a P-12 educator. You
That's right.
have been a university faculty member.
That's right.
That includes being a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
You have worked at another association in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And now you are the CEO of NCLD. So if you could string for us those kind of experiences, what have you learned along the way as a teacher, as a faculty member at a university, as a researcher, as a member of another association? What have you learned through those experiences, and how did they help to land you in this position, and an illustrious position as a CEO of the National Center for Learning Disabilities?
When this job became known to me, I knew it was my professional home. I knew that because each chapter of my journey, whether it was as a classroom teacher, a Holmes scholar, as a doctoral student, whether it was at the professor of students who were going to be teaching my students in the future, and now as a CEO, it's deepened my understanding of what equity looks like in practice. I've been really fortunate that people have opened doors for me and allowed me to demonstrate the necessity for equity to drive decision-making. And I think as a Holmes scholar in particular, you and I both know we have what is a dearth of diversity in higher education. And in addition to that, the dearth at the PhD level or the EDD level is even greater. And so when we think about how to research and serve communities as scholars of color pursuing, these terminal degrees, we see how policy specifically, those gaps really impact kids. That's the number one piece of my takeaway as a Holmes scholar, is the understanding between the gap of policy to practice, and how I, as a researcher and as a leader of an organization, to help to close the gap and inform really great policy to serve communities that have either had their voice extinguished or their voice has been muted. And I'm really honored not only to be at NCLD, which is a tremendous organization, but to serve alongside the colleagues on the team. We have truly a remarkable team at this organization.
That's wonderful. You can't do it without having a great team. And just for clarification for folks who have heard us talk about the Holmes Scholars Program, the Holmes Scholars Program was originated back in the 1980s under the Holmes Partnership Holmes Group to diversify the composition of individuals pursuing careers in education at the post-secondary level. So that was a wonderful opportunity. So I had an opportunity to, and I knew about your organization, but I had an opportunity to prepare a bit more for this interview with you by researching some of the, as you mentioned, strategic planning and goals. So there are several mission-driven pillars of the organization, including a foci on research, advocacy, which you've mentioned, and coalition building. But one of those stands out to me, as I would probably see it, as a root cause aim for excellence and equity. And that is dismantling the stigma by increasing access and opportunity for young folks who are thriving with learning disabilities. So can you share for us how dismantling stigma informs your work, and what challenges and or successes have emerged?
dismantling stigma is at the core of everything we do. Stigma is often the first barrier a student with learning disabilities encounters.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to, as an organization and as a society, shift the mindset and the narrative from deficit-based thinking, from labels to potential and to lived experiences. And we do that by increasing access, opportunity for kids with LD to participate in their K-12 environment, in their IEP meetings, in their conversations at higher education institutions around accommodations they may need, and in their workplaces by advocating for themselves on the supports that they would benefit from in order to not only sustain themselves, but to thrive, as you mentioned. And so NCLD is driving that specific change. We're driving those policy and practices in education, and we're restoring the dignity to the community around LD, because the rhetoric is often, as I mentioned, deficit-based, and it really needs to be about the potential instead. One example of how we're doing this, NCLD has traditionally and historically produced a really significant piece of research called the State of Learning Disabilities. It's a report that spans all 50 states. It includes data on how students are performing on the NAEP, our National Assessment for Educational Progress, typically coined the nation's report card. And it includes data around how educators are supporting students in classrooms. Well, this past 2 years, NCLD made the very deliberate and intentional shift around that state of learning disabilities to actually expand the work and to produce something that is not just substantial for policymakers, but the key takeaways here are for educators, for family members, and for students themselves. So we actually had so much data from this report that we cut it in half, and we sent out the first half of it this past year and have been continuously disseminating this to people who need it most, the educators and the families and students around young adults in transition. And we've done that because what we realized, young adults in high school specifically have still felt the stigma of bias, of bullying, and a sense that they do not belong. And our report actually indicates that when a student with LD feels that sense of belonging, it has become the number one predictor of their success moving out of high school and the number one predictor of their success in college or in another higher education pursuit. And so when we think about stigma being the barrier that students LD first encounter, we also see that as the solution. If we dismantle the stigma, if we provide people with alternative mindsets, ones that are based off of true lived experience, where potential is the narrative, then students with LD will be successful no matter what environment they belong in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you brought up three things that a couple of terms you use, IEP. So I want to talk a bit about that because I want to make sure that our community, for those who aren't connected to the work and support of students with learning disabilities, what that looks like. And then you talked about belonging. So this report, State of Learning Disabilities, sort of prompts me to ask about a new report that you have, which is Succeeding Beyond High School, Insights and Actions for Supporting Students with Disabilities. And that was co-published recently. I believe it was just released this month. So that report draws on a study, again, of young adults with learning disabilities who either considered or left high school without graduating. And the report lays out recommendations for, as you mentioned earlier, I think this is kind of in this nice synergy for leaders, for teachers, and for what we would call policymakers, but I also like to include something we might call community advocates as well.
Yes.
So student engagement and belonging seems to be the central focus of this report. How did that partnership come to be with other organizations? So you can talk about them, and what is your organization's role in supporting schools and families in meeting the recommendations of this report for student success?
The origin story of this portion of the state of learning disabilities on young adults and the transition space began likely 3 or 4 years ago when we considered what the needs are of young people on our Young Adult Leadership Council. So NCLD has, for many years, hosted a fellowship program for typically 18, all the way in some cases up to the mid-30s, of people with LD who inform our policy and practice. So again, we're not doing this on behalf of, we are doing this with people within the community, and that's a very intentional approach. We decided as an organization that a gap existed in really understanding how youth were being better prepared or prepared at all for post-secondary outcomes. Was college and career readiness truly a part of their secondary experience? And if not, how could we help educators and families and students better prepare kids with LD, whether they were going into a vocational program, certification, licensure, whether it was a 4-year undergrad, a 2-year community college, or straight into the workforce. So you mentioned IEPs, right? A student with an LD will have an IEP through their secondary education, through K-12, but they are required by law to have a transition statement in that IEP. By law, you have to start that by the first IEP after the student turns 16. Many states, however, have gone above that, and they've started that transition planning at 14. What NCLD has recognized and acknowledged is that while that is a legal requirement, the unfortunate circumstances of funding in our school systems really force educators to perform that transition statement and create a transition plan for students more for out of compliance, and it's become more performative than it has been productive. And that's not the case for all students with disabilities, but by and large, students with LD, which is often looked at as an invisible disability, are left without that type of strong support. So this report that we did was helping us better understand the perspective of students. What did they get in high school? What did they need from their high school educators? How could they have been more successfully prepared for post-secondary outcomes? And we knew that as an organization, we had the content and subject matter expertise, but what we really wanted was the most rigorous methodology possible. So we partnered with WestEd, who people in the field will know as an incredible agency on research. And they helped us to design a report that is not only nationally representative, but also longitudinal in nature so that we can actually look at student outcomes over time. It's the first of its kind seminal research, and we are happy not only to contribute that to the field, but to really help harness the outcomes for, as you mentioned, the community stakeholders that are involved in the kids' lives.
So again, that report is Succeeding in High Schools and Beyond: Insights and Actions for Supporting Students with Disabilities. Is it available in its whole form presently for the community? Excellent.
That
So we'll
is
put that in the
available.
show notes. So I want to unpack IEPs and transition plans a bit, because I think those are important. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we both come from P12. So that was not my area of preparation. I come out of foreign languages and gifted in that regard, gifted education. So I guess in some ways it does speak to students with exceptionalities. But most people don't understand what IEPs are if you have not directly work with the student who has an IEP under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and then transition plans. So in my opinion, this is my sort of personal but yet professional perspective, having had a family member who was thriving with a learning disability and did have years ago challenges from school to career. What is an IEP? How is that sort of developed and supported? And then specifically, what is a transition plan? And give examples of what that might look like.
So an IEP is an individualized education program. It is something that the school and the family, and oftentimes a student when they are of age, participate in crafting together. It is intended in the spirit of the law, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to provide a program of services to the student with a disability that is individualized per that student's needs. And within that IEP, whether you have a disability like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or if you have an intellectual disability, or you have a learning disability like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, you receive that IEP as a part of the legal requirement through the law, but also as a service. Right? So the school will come together annually to discuss what is contained in the IEP. They anticipate and expect families to contribute goals for their own child. And the student, when of course they're ready and of age, with this idea of self-advocacy and self-determination, also participate in crafting what those annual goals look like. At the high school level, to your point, the transition statement, as I mentioned earlier, is an amazing, tremendous opportunity to have that student help set the stage for their own future. So we invite students to those IEP meetings, especially at 16, and sometimes as early as 14 for those transition plans to start, so that they can make known to the community of stakeholders who are there to support their future what it is that their specific goals are. So a student can come up with whether or not they are intending to go to higher education, if so, what kind of career path they want to go to, what types of degree fields they're thinking about, all the way to backwards mapping. If I want to go and become a physicist, what do I need to take in high school so that I can make sure I have all of the prerequisites necessary for that degree field and even to enter the degree field. That transition plan should be tremendously robust. It is really intended to create the roadmap for the future. The unfortunate circumstance, though, is that this country has had what I would say is a crisis within the special education teacher shortage for decades. Many of us in the education community will not be surprised to hear that. Those outside of the community are often wondering how a shortage of this magnitude can continue to exist. And yet it does. Year after year, we still do not have enough special educators to serve all of our students. And what that means is that those special educators in the field have to divide their time amongst all of the students that need their supports and to attend to those services. And what we find is the unfortunate collateral damage of the lack of time is that students' transition plans are not robust. And I truly believe this has to do with funding. This is a real mark on how the country sees education as a public good, because the federal funding for IDEA, while committed at 40%, this year is between 12 and 13%. Imagine the gap that exists there. So if we can't recruit, retain, and support excellent, high-quality special educators, it should not be surprising that transition plans are mostly compliant and are not robust enough to truly create that roadmap that every student needs.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation, and I want to lean into when we talk about advocacy, how do we prepare families? Because I find that when we talk about issues of students with disabilities or learning challenges, that a lot of this work politically, I'm saying politically, most folks who I know who have gotten into the work in education in general, but particularly working with students with learning disabilities, has been due to an up close and personal experience with an individual or a family that is thriving in this area. So if I am a parent and I have a young child and someone says perhaps your child is struggling in an area, and should they be tested? So what should be my first course of action when I'm anxious now that I'm doing something new and I want to support my child, and understanding the difference between what is a learning disability specifically from the work of your organization versus other types of like intellectual challenges?
I want to first acknowledge that anxiety around testing is normal and a natural response and truly should be expected. I say that from my own personal experience as a parent who went through the assessment process with my child. So for parents out there that receive the news from an educator that they believe their student should be assessed as to whether or not there is a disability impacting their ability to learn, I want you to first say to yourself, there's nothing you did. There's no fault or blame. There's no shame or guilt. This needs to be looked at once you've processed the information as an opportunity, and that your child will be receiving high quality supports from an expert educator to ensure that their educational career path is one where they feel they can thrive in. When a family comes to the table and they've heard from their general education teacher often that the student is not necessarily meeting the type of progress expected of either the grade level or the age, or even with what we call response to intervention in schools, which is a teacher identifying a student as perhaps struggling, responding to that struggle with a type of intervention, and then taking data on whether that intervention yields any outcomes that are of progress. That's when a family typically becomes involved in the process. They find out, did that response yield positive outcomes? Did the intervention support the student? If not, why? What other types of interventions might be necessary? And once the educator and the family have collectively exhausted all of those types of interventions that we believe should support the student, and we realize that progress is still not being made, we want to start assessing for whether or not there's something else going on that is creating a barrier. And it could honestly be that the student learns differently than his or her their peers. And we can address that as educators. And so we want families to feel protected by that assessment process, because now educators are better informed on how to teach the student so the student can learn. So that assessment process takes some time. There are guidelines within the school and legally how long the assessment process should at what point it should culminate. And then you as a family receive an outcome, which either indicates that your student does indeed necessitate services within a special education teacher, or no, they don't require services. Perhaps what they might need is some sort of tier 2 or tier 3 intervention that hasn't been used yet. So I want families to recognize that special education exists so that expert educators can truly facilitate learning for the child. And while it feels very overwhelming in the beginning, the whole spirit of the law is to create collaboration amongst all the people at the table. And if families don't feel like that is happening, their voice is more important than anybody's. They need to be speaking up and saying to the team, these are things that we need. These are the things we're looking for. These are the ways in which we want you to support in left or right, etc., so that they not only feel a part of the team, but in many ways they're leading that team.
I really appreciate that focus on ensuring that we have sufficient and accurate and timely information to make decisions about how we support children and learners. So I don't want to just say children, but someone's family member who is struggling with learning in school.
Thank you for listening to EdUp Accelerated Excellence. This episode is supported by the 2.0 conferences to be held in Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, April 7th through 9th, 2026. Business leaders, educators, healthcare experts, marketing and tech professionals, and founding entrepreneurs are welcome to take part. Reserve your space today and receive a 15% discount courtesy of EdUp Accelerated Excellence with the code EDUPXE15OFF. That's EdUPXE15OFF. Check out the details in the show notes or learn more and register online at the2conf.com. That's the2conf.com with the code EDUPXE15OFF.
Are you an educational leader or organization seeking innovation or just a new perspective? Then look no further. Accelerated Excellence Consulting is dedicated to offering support to educational leaders and their organizations to meet their full potential for excellence. Services include strategic planning and problem solving, continuous improvement expertise in areas such as assessment and accreditation, and professional development, empowering leaders, individuals, and groups for personal growth for organizational excellence. To learn more, find us online at xeconsulting.org. That's xeconsulting.org. So we're speaking with Jacqueline Rodriguez, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the National Center for Learning Disabilities. So, Jackie, we're going to draw back a bit. And many educators are calling the current time as a moment of uncertainty within the profession. Specifically, there have been concerns about the dismantling of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the potential impact that such dismantlement will have on vulnerable populations. NCLD is at the forefront of advocacy, as you mentioned earlier, for the rights and protections of students with learning disabilities. We've had this new big, beautiful bill, and I know your organization was at the forefront again in advocating for what was the initial sort of development of what that might look like, particularly around funding and protections for students with learning disabilities. But what has been your organization's specific role in advocacy? And now that the bill has been signed, what potential impact do you think it might have on your population?
When we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, I want to be very clear that equity isn't a side project. It is central to good education, period. The political backlash around DEI has had a significant chilling effect across all of teacher preparation, in-service teachers, supporting students in classrooms, and especially around emphasizing culturally responsive and or inclusive practices. When we think about the big, beautiful bill, a legislative effort that would truly dismantle public education as we know it, what we realize is that the community, by and large, must be in coalition, we must speak in concert, and we have to continue to raise our voices, because the outcome of that vote was that legislators were not listening, hearing, or opening themselves to being informed by advocates in the field who kept telling them the same thing. This is not good public policy. It is essentially a math problem that ripped and pillaged public funds out of public schools And we don't agree that public funds should be used for private educations without any public oversight or public accountability. So for those of us on the call who know a little bit more about the amendments within the BBB, the voucher program was the most significantly reported on. The fact that we have never had a national school voucher program in this country, and that bill essentially constituted one. It doesn't even have a cap on how much money can be pulled from the public school system and put into private sector schools. So right now, the United States is going to allow some taxpayers to put into a scholarship granting organization a certain amount of money annually. And it's not necessarily a contribution like a family would make to the SPCA or to another charity. It is actually now a tax write-off. It is a $1-for-$1 reduction in your taxes. This is literally unprecedented in the country. In addition to somebody getting that tax write-off, these scholarship granting organizations can take the money and put them toward privatization of schools and a host of other activities that we will now be advocating that they press on. For example, after-school tutoring and textbooks and curriculum supports. That being said, the money that would have otherwise gone into the public school is now being pulled, and it's leaving the public oversight. And when a student goes into the public school system, they receive, through their IEP, legally mandated services. If they leave the public system and they move into the private sector, they lose all of those protections. So the civil rights that they receive in the public school do not transfer to the private school. And private schools have, by and large, more often than not, excluded students with disabilities from their education. And we see hand over fist students leaving the public school system to pursue a private education where they do not receive the services necessary for them to thrive, and they return right back to the public school. However, while they may receive their rights in the public school upon return, they don't receive their money back. So now the public school is supporting that student and all the services that benefit them without the financial supports to make sure that those services are provided. And essentially, it pillages the public school from serving all kids. BBB didn't just create this voucher program, it also reduced things like Medicaid. And many of us in the field recognize that Medicaid funding in schools is a huge amount of support for all students. And yet, when we reduce the amount of Medicaid going to schools, it doesn't just hurt the students with disabilities who are receiving those services. For example, speech pathology or adapted physical education. We don't have enough of these educators across the country to have one in every school. So these educators, these service providers have to move across schools and across communities, sometimes multiple times a day. Medicaid pays for a lot of the types of services that I've just noted. When we reduce the amount of Medicaid that goes into schools, we don't just reduce the services that are being provided to those students. What we don't realize is those services are actually benefiting all of the kids in the classroom because this country has moved to an inclusive education approach. So 30 years ago, perhaps that speech pathologist pulled a student out and did a one-to-one service. Nowadays, we really encourage speech pathologists to be in general classrooms, supporting that student, but in small group settings, and oftentimes, even sometimes co-teaching. So now that service provider can't come as often, can't provide the level of service they were providing because there isn't enough funding. And now every student is losing. And this bill is the lever This is the kind of legislative action that advocates have been ringing the alarm bell over, because we continue to deplete the public school system of the funding necessary to do its job well. And then we point the finger at the public school system for not being able to serve in the way we think it should. Essentially, we've set the system up for failure. And I can't get away from the fact that I believe it's intentional.
So I think these are important insights. And again, thank you for that. So, Jackie, what is next for NCLD and or your own personal work? Are there any speaking engagements or books that the EdUp Accelerated Excellence community can look for, either from NCLD or Jacqueline Rodriguez? And how might we connect with either of you?
I appreciate the interest. NCLD will be releasing another large longitudinal report based on the state of learning disabilities, looking at general and special educators and how they collaborate and support kids with LD in classrooms. And I think this is going to be pivotal when we think about practice. So we focus primarily on young people, their experiences, and how we can help them thrive, informing policy and practice. This time, we are looking at, coming to you in January and into the spring, what it means to be an educator right now, and how principals and superintendents and state leaders can create an ecosystem that ensures and enables collaboration between a general educator, a special educator, that student, and that family. So be on the lookout for that report coming out in the next couple of months. We're also hosting our second annual Learning Disabilities Summit this October. Congress enacted LD Awareness Month for the month of October. And so based on that, we started an annual summit to gather stakeholders around the table to discuss the policies that impact our kids and our young people, as well as how to create synergy and networks and communities. So this goes even beyond education, but to the workforce. How do we ensure that in the workforce, we have neuro-inclusive practices and mindsets? And so that is happening October 6th, 7th, and 8th in Washington, D.C. And we will actually be having a hybrid event. So we're looking for anyone interested in participating virtually to come and learn more about how to advocate on the Hill and in states. And we'll be doing that in person for those of you who want to travel or might be in the district area to join us in D.C. for those 3 days. We have several other white papers coming out this fall on identification, on assessment of learning disabilities, and even on disparate impact when it comes to discipline for kids with disabilities. So we'll be sharing those widely on social media and on our website. I'll be doing another podcast actually soon, talking very specifically about IEPs that we can share the link for. And I recently published a book for those of you who are interested in more of the legal background and the policy foundations. We have special education law and policy from foundation to practice. It's on Amazon, etc. But truly, this, although a curriculum textbook and widely used in higher education environments for classes, it's great for any family member who has a newly identified student or is going through the process, and you really understand the backbone. Where did all of this come from, and why do we have a law requiring it? What does the law actually support? What is your place in ensuring the law is put into practice? And what should you expect from educators? And what can educators anticipate from you? So I find that book to be very user-friendly, lots and lots of case studies. And to be honest with you, it wasn't just written with colleagues who are great in the field. It's actually written with stories of the people that happened to. So the kids helped write the stories, the case studies from the attorneys that helped support it, and the educators that were at the table. So it's a truly on the ground context. And I'm always happy to chat with people. And People who know me know this is true. I always say, if you don't contact me, it's a missed opportunity. I really do want to make sure that whatever I've learned and the network I've created benefits other people. That's our job in education, is to connect and make sure that somebody can step on our shoulders and move the work forward. So I'd be happy to chat with anybody, even via email if that's better, so that if you need to meet someone or you're interested in a particular area, or you want to get involved, you want to come with us to DC and come to the meetings, I want you to come.
So we will definitely put this information in the show notes. To recap, there is an interesting, I did not know this, that there's a Learning Disabilities Month, which is October, that we recognize. So that's huge. Applause. And so NCLD will be hosting the Learning Disabilities Summit.
Correct.
Virtually and in person, so no one will be excused from being able to participate. And this book, I'm going to recap the title for you. So the title is Special Education Law and Policy from Foundation to Application. The authors are, of course, our guests, Jacqueline Rodriguez and Wendy Borowski. Yes, so be on the lookout for that book as well, if you haven't had a chance to read it. Dr. Jacqueline Rodriguez, thank you for this opportunity to learn with and from you here at EdUp Accelerated Excellence.
It was a joy and a pleasure, and I hope that we can see each other very, very soon. And to all of those of you listening, thank you for participating and wanting to learn more about people with learning disabilities. And I hope the takeaway here is that you have a voice and you can take action. And if you need support, NCLD is here to be there with you.
Thank you.
Thank you for engaging with EdUp Accelerated Excellence, a member of the EdUp Experience Network of educational podcasts. You can find this and other episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Radio, and other outlets where you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you like this episode, don't forget to follow us and share within your network. To leave a comment or suggest a guest, contact us online at edupxe.com.